can you imagine the thing? Most Americans today in their 20s are still living in with their parents because they can't afford to buy a home. It's become that expensive.
You have made a fascinating point in the book, that is inflation, interest rates, and asset price bubbles, and the tendency to look at consumer price without looking at asset price increases. Would you like to share or expand on this a little bit?
Yeah.
And what is the balance, and how do you find that balance?
Yeah, so I think the point that you're trying to make here is this, that I've argued in the book that the central banks around the world, their focus has historically been on consumer price inflation, which is that as long as consumer prices are relatively restrained, we can go out and stimulate and do as much as you want, right? That's what central banks around the world have had this sort of mandate. As I argue in the book, that consumer prices in general around the world have remained low for the last 40 years or so because of globalization, because of technology, right? You have so much cheap labor, cheap goods coming from China, other places of globalization that's kept consumer prices low. So central banks have got emboldened by saying, okay, consumer prices are low, we can now throw as much money at the system to try and promote economic growth. What I say is that what this has done instead is that it has boosted asset prices. That a lot of this money has gone into boosting asset prices of stocks, bonds, and property. And to me, this is the single most important thing. If there's one symbol of what's gone wrong with capitalism in the West, it is the fact that you have had a runaway growth in property prices. You know, like as I argue in the book, that about like a generation ago, it took about 3 years for a person buying a home in America to be able to make the down payment. Now, it's taking 19 years, right? So can you imagine the thing? Most Americans today in their 20s are still living in with their parents because they can't afford to buy a home. It's become that expensive. There's a real affordability crisis in America.
So how do you deflate this inflated property and stock and other things? Is there a soft landing, or is it going to be a crash?
No, I think that it has to be two levels, right? One, central banks have to be mindful that when they intervene and when they sort of throw so much money in the system, you are also pushing up property prices. Second, of course, goes back to my point on what went wrong with capitalism, that, you know, like somebody gave me this very fascinating statistic today, that in America today, the number of new homes being created today is the same as in the 1950s every year, which basically means that the population has doubled, but the number of new homes you're creating is still very low. Why is that? Because you have so much regulation that it's impossible to almost create a new home. And what they call out there called NIMBYism, right? Which is not in my own backyard. That every community, you know, like has a fact that, yeah, you can build a home, but don't do it in my community in terms of that. So you're almost excluding lots of people from doing that. So I think what you need is policies on both sides. Central banks more sensitive that if you are going to throw a lot of cheap money at the system, you're boosting up asset prices because the rich, you know, get access to the finance and go and accumulate many homes. And the supply side solution needs to be, how do you do lots of deregulation so that people build? And that's one of the ironies, you know, like one of the things which I found fascinating about the book as well in the reaction to it is that a lot of people from the Trump campaign have been, you know, like in touch and calling me and stuff like that. Okay, what are your ideas and stuff? And I say that, like, one of the great ironies...
Only Trump campaign is calling you for ideas.
I'm saying, like, one of the ironies that they've called, and I told them that one of the great things here is that your man here is a builder. Why can't he, you know, like say that his campaign should be build, right, in terms of building homes, in terms of that. What is it that you need to do to increase the supply of homes so that home prices come down? So that's what I've said is one of the things in the book that I've spoken about, that asset price inflation is terrible. And the other thing is that when asset prices go bust, then it's a real problem because, you know, it leads to so much debt in the system. And every single major recession, you can argue like 2008 and stuff, has not been caused so much by consumer price inflation, it's caused by too much debt in the system, and then that takes asset prices down, and that's when the economies sort of really suffer.